They chained her to humiliate her, but she looked at the rancher and said, "Save me." The streets were narrow and dusty, lined with small houses made of clay and stone, with wooden doors that creaked in the wind. In the distance, the field stretched endlessly, waving gently under the warm breeze. Life in the village moved slowly, almost peacefully, as though time itself had decided to rest there. People went about their daily routines, tending to their animals, repairing fences, or carrying water from the well. Among them was Layla, a young woman known for her kindness and her determination. She lived a simple life, helping her family with chores and occasionally assisting neighbors. She had a quiet strength that most people respected, though few truly understood. That day, Layla had gone to the outskirts of the village, beyond the main road, to gather some wild herbs that grew near the small stream. The air was fresh, carrying the faint scent of earth and flowers. Birds chirped in the trees, and the occasional rustle of small animals made the place feel alive. Layla moved carefully among the plants, her hands brushing over the soft leaves as she picked the herbs she needed. She hummed a soft tune to herself, unaware that today would not be like any other day. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her, stretching long across the ground. Layla looked up and saw a group of men standing a few feet away. They were known in the village, though mostly by reputation rather than personal acquaintance. Stories about them circulated in whispers, stories of intimidation, threats, and cruelty, but no one had dared challenge them directly. Now they stood before her, their expressions unreadable, yet their intentions clear. Layla's heart began to pound, not with panic but with a growing sense of unease. She had faced challenges before, but this felt different. One of the men stepped forward, his voice low and commanding. "Come with us," he said. There was no room for negotiation. Layla hesitated, her mind racing, but she knew arguing would only make things worse. She followed them a few steps, hoping for a chance to turn back, but the men were quick, surrounding her before she could react. Within moments, she found herself chained to a sturdy post that had been placed deliberately near the edge of the field. The chains were cold and heavy against her wrists, and the rough metal dug slightly into her skin. The men stepped back, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Layla's first instinct was shock. She had never imagined anyone would dare humiliate her in such a way. She could feel the eyes of the village from afar, though most were hidden behind closed doors or peeking from windows, and the weight of their silent gaze pressed down on her like a stone. The humiliation was sharp, but Layla refused to let it break her spirit. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and looked around. Her eyes scanned the field desperately, seeking anyone who might help, anyone who could stand against the injustice. It was then that she saw Elias, the rancher. He was a man in his 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with hands hardened by years of labor and a heart known to be kind and courageous. He had been tending to his cattle nearby when he noticed the commotion. From a distance, he observed the scene carefully, noting the fear in Layla's eyes and the cruel smirks of the men. Elias had always felt a strong sense of responsibility toward his village, believing that protecting others was more important than staying safe. Today, that belief would be tested. Layla, still chained, looked directly at Elias. Her gaze was steady, but it carried the weight of silent pleading. She didn't shout or beg. She only mouthed a single word with her lips: "Save me." It was a small gesture, but Elias understood immediately. The connection between them was unspoken yet powerful. He knew that acting recklessly could put both of them in danger, but he also knew that standing by and doing nothing was not an option. The men began to notice Elias watching from afar, and one of them pointed in his direction, smirking. "Look who's staring," the man said, his tone mocking. "Does he think he can do anything?" Layla's heart sank for a moment, but she quickly pushed aside fear. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it. She straightened her back, held her head high, and prepared herself for whatever might come next. Elias walked closer, his movements calm and deliberate. Every step he took seemed to carry both authority and caution. The villagers, some of whom had gathered quietly at a distance, began to murmur among themselves. There was a mixture of fear and hope in the air. They had seen Layla chained and humiliated, and though they had felt powerless before, Elias' approach stirred something inside them. Perhaps, they thought, someone could finally stand up to these men. Layla's mind raced. She thought of her family, who would be frantic if they knew what had happened. She thought of her neighbors, many of whom had faced small injustices but had never dared speak up. She knew that this moment was more than just about her. It was about sending a message that cruelty would not be tolerated. Even while bound, she felt a surge of determination rising within her. Elias stopped a short distance away, his gaze steady on the men. "Let her go," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the field. The sound of his words was clear and commanding, yet calm. The men laughed, thinking it a joke, but Elias did not waver. He had faced many challenges in life, storms on the ranch, disputes over land, even wild animals threatening his livestock. But he had learned that standing for what is right often required courage, patience, and a steady heart. The tension in the air grew thick. Birds fell silent in the trees, and even the wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself was watching. Layla's eyes never left Elias. She drew strength from his presence, realizing that she was not alone. Her fear was still there, but it had been replaced by a flicker of hope. She clenched her fists against the chains, refusing to let despair take over. The men, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to mutter among themselves. For the first time, they hesitated. They had relied on fear and intimidation to control the village, but they did not expect someone to confront them so openly, nor did they expect the silent defiance of their victim. Layla's courage, paired with Elias' calm determination, had begun to turn the tide. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm orange glow across the field, the stage was set for what would come next. Layla remained chained, but she was no longer just a victim. She was a symbol of quiet strength, of dignity in the face of humiliation. And Elias, standing tall, ready to act, represented the hope that courage could still prevail. The moment was tense, fragile, yet full of possibility. One choice, one brave act could change everything. In that instant, the village held its breath. Layla's silent plea, Elias' unwavering stance, and the uncertain hesitation of the men created a delicate balance. The story of this day, she knew, would not be forgotten, whether it ended in tragedy or triumph. And somewhere deep inside, Layla felt a small, unshakable belief that help had arrived, and that courage, even in the darkest moments, could light the way. Layla remained chained to the post, her wrists pressed against the cold metal, yet her spirit refused to break. The humiliation she had felt moments ago was still present, but it had been tempered by hope, the hope she had found in Elias, the rancher who had stepped forward to confront the men. She studied him from where she stood, noting the way he moved with calm confidence. His eyes, steady and unwavering, carried a quiet strength that seemed to cut through the tension around them. Even from a distance, Layla could feel the determination radiating from him, and it gave her courage she hadn't realized she still possessed. Elias took another careful step closer. He spoke again, his voice low but firm. "This is not right. You have no right to treat her this way." The men exchanged glances, some rolling their eyes, others tightening their jaws. They were used to controlling people through fear, but they had not expected someone like Elias, a man known for his fairness, strength, and respect in the village, to openly challenge them. A hush fell over the gathered villagers as they watched the confrontation unfold. Many had peeked from behind doors or fences, too afraid to step forward before, but now their curiosity was mixed with a flicker of hope. Perhaps change was possible. Layla's gaze never left Elias. She mouthed the single word again, "Save me." This time the word carried more than a plea, it carried trust. She trusted him to act, to do what was right, and to protect her even if it meant putting himself at risk. Elias noticed her silent plea and felt a surge of responsibility wash over him. He had always believed in standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves, and now the moment to act had arrived. The men laughed at first, a harsh, mocking sound that filled the quiet field. "Do you really think you can stop us?" one of them sneered. "She's just a girl and you're a lone man. Go home before you get hurt." But Elias did not retreat. His face remained calm, but his eyes hardened. He had faced danger before, both in the wild fields of his ranch and in disputes among villagers, and he had learned that courage was not about avoiding fear. It was about facing it with purpose. He spoke again, his voice rising slightly so that everyone could hear. "If you value your reputation at all, you will release her now. Humiliation and cruelty have no place here." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. The villagers began to murmur quietly among themselves, some expressing approval, others barely daring to breathe. Layla felt a strange sense of power in her helplessness, knowing that her silent connection with Elias had begun to shift the balance. The men hesitated. They had relied on fear and silence to control the village, but this confrontation was different. One of them stepped forward aggressively, his face twisted in anger. "You dare challenge us," he spat. "Do you think your words can protect her?" Layla's heart pounded as she watched Elias, fully aware of the danger, take another slow step forward. He held his hand slightly raised, not as a threat, but as a sign of measured control. Every movement was deliberate, every word calculated. Layla realized that while she was chained and seemingly powerless, she still had a role to play. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and spoke for the first time since being chained. "You are wrong," she shouted, her voice ringing across the field. "What you are doing is cruel and unfair. You cannot humiliate me to make yourselves feel stronger." Her words were clear and firm, filled with a dignity that surprised even her. The men blinked, momentarily stunned. They had expected her to beg, to cry, to plead for mercy, but instead she had spoken with confidence. The villagers around them gasped softly. Layla's courage sparked something in them. Many had quietly suffered under the men's intimidation for years, but seeing her speak out, even while chained, made them reconsider their own fear. Some clenched their fists in silent support, others simply watched, inspired by her bravery. The atmosphere began to shift subtly. The balance of power that had always favored the aggressors was being challenged, not just by Elias, but by the woman he had come to protect. Elias took another step forward. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It is over. Release her or face the consequences of your actions in front of everyone." The men glanced at each other, tension flickering in their eyes. They had not anticipated resistance, especially not public resistance. The situation was becoming unpredictable, and they were no longer entirely confident in their control. Layla's mind raced. She had always been cautious and careful, but now she realized that courage was essential. She could not allow fear to dominate her. With every ounce of strength, she pulled gently against the chains, testing their weight. She felt the cold metal bite slightly into her skin, but it did not deter her. Each small movement reminded her that she was still alive, still strong, and still capable of facing whatever came next. The men shifted uneasily. One of them, slightly older and perhaps more cautious, spoke quietly to his companions. "Maybe we should leave her," he suggested. "It's not worth the trouble." But the others shook their heads, stubbornly clinging to their sense of control. Elias, however, did not wait. He had learned the value of action in moments like this. Hesitation could cost lives. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tool he always carried for work on the ranch. It was not a weapon, but a practical tool, sharp enough to cut ropes or chains if necessary. He moved carefully toward Layla, keeping his eyes on the men. Every step was deliberate, every motion measured. He did not want to escalate the situation unnecessarily, but he was prepared to act if the men refused to relent. Layla watched in anticipation. She felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. The chains were heavy and unyielding, yet she sensed that freedom was within reach. Her trust in Elias strengthened, and she began to feel a quiet determination building inside her. She would not simply be saved, she would reclaim her dignity in the process. The crowd of villagers began to shift subtly. Some stepped slightly closer, drawn by the courage displayed before them. Others whispered to each other, debating whether they should intervene or stay hidden. The presence of witnesses mattered. The men were now aware that their actions were no longer private, and public scrutiny can be a powerful deterrent. Layla felt the energy of the village around her, a quiet force that gave her hope and strengthened her resolve. Elias reached the chains and examined them carefully. He worked with steady hands, trying to release Layla without causing her harm or escalating the confrontation. The men began to move toward him, their expressions mixed with anger and uncertainty. But Elias remained calm, speaking to them as he worked. "You see how wrong this is. You cannot force respect through cruelty. Let her go and regain the respect you are losing by your actions." Layla's voice rang out again. "I am not your enemy. I am a person with dignity, and I will not be humiliated to satisfy your pride." Her words, once spoken, seemed to have a ripple effect. The men paused, their confidence shaken. The field, which had moments ago felt tense and threatening, now carried a sense of anticipation. Something significant was about to happen, a moment where courage, integrity, and action could change the course of events. The chains, heavy and unyielding, began to loosen under Elias' careful work. Layla felt the weight lift slightly, a sensation that brought tears of relief to her eyes. But she did not run or cry. She remained standing, holding her head high, knowing that dignity was as important as freedom. The men, now confronted by both action and courage, hesitated further. Their usual tactics of intimidation were losing power, and uncertainty flickered across their faces. For a long moment, there was silence. The wind rustled the grass, birds chirped softly in the distance, and the villagers watched quietly. Layla and Elias stood together, a picture of courage against fear. She knew that what happened next would define not just this moment, but the way the village viewed justice, bravery, and integrity. Freedom was close, but it was also fragile, dependent on the decisions of those around her. Finally, with one careful movement, Elias unlocked the last restraint. The chains fell to the ground with a soft clink. Layla's wrists were free, and yet she did not immediately step away. She looked at Elias, gratitude shining in her eyes, and then turned toward the men. Her voice was calm, firm, and full of authority. "This ends now. Humiliation and cruelty have no place here, and I will not allow them to continue." The men looked at her, at Elias, and at the silent witnesses of the village. For the first time, they realized that fear alone could not control people who were courageous and determined. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to back away. The confrontation had ended, but the impact would last far longer. Layla, once chained and humiliated, now stood free, not just in body but in spirit. The moment the chains fell to the ground, Layla took a deep breath, feeling the cold metal no longer binding her wrists. Freedom was a sensation she had never felt so intensely, a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. For years, she had lived cautiously, careful to avoid confrontation or trouble. But today, in front of the entire village, she had faced humiliation, fear, and the possibility of real danger. And yet she had survived, standing tall. She looked at Elias, her rescuer and ally, and offered a small, genuine smile. It was not a smile of relief alone, but one of shared courage, a silent acknowledgement that they had taken the first step toward justice together. The men, though still present, had begun to show signs of unease. They were accustomed to controlling people through intimidation, but they had never encountered a situation where their victim and the protector stood together so firmly. Elias remained calm, his eyes fixed on the group, conveying a silent warning. Any further aggression would not be tolerated. His body language, steady and deliberate, showed that he was ready to act if necessary, but he preferred reason and dialogue over violence. The village had gathered in small clusters nearby, watching quietly. Their expressions reflected surprise, admiration, and a cautious sense of hope. Layla's mind raced as she considered what to do next. Though her physical chains were gone, she understood that the psychological weight of the humiliation could linger if she allowed it. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and began to speak, her voice clear and firm. "This cannot happen again. No one should ever be treated this way, not in this village, not anywhere. We must stand together to ensure that cruelty has no place here." Her words were deliberate, filled with conviction. They were not directed only at the men who had chained her, but also at the villagers, many of whom had remained silent out of fear. The men exchanged glances, now uncertain. For the first time, they faced resistance not only from Elias but also from Layla herself. Her courage, amplified by her calm words and dignified stance, made them question their own actions. One of the men, the tallest and most imposing of the group, clenched his fists, frustrated that his authority was being challenged. But even he hesitated, recognizing the strength in both Layla and Elias, and the silent yet growing support of the villagers. It was clear that fear alone could no longer control this moment. Elias stepped closer to Layla, careful to maintain a safe distance from the men. "You can leave peacefully," he said calmly. "No one here wants unnecessary conflict, but your actions have consequences. Humiliation is not strength, and cruelty is not respect." His words were simple, but they carried weight, resonating with both the aggressors and the witnesses around them. The older villagers, some of whom had once endured similar intimidation, nodded quietly, their eyes reflecting agreement. They had seen the patterns of fear and silence for years, but now, inspired by Layla's bravery and Elias' intervention, they felt something new, a flicker of courage within themselves. Layla's gaze shifted from Elias to the crowd of villagers. She noticed young girls and boys watching silently, their eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. She realized that her own courage might inspire others to stand up for what is right. "We cannot let fear rule our lives," she said, her voice steady. "We must support one another, speak for one another, and protect one another. Only then can we live with dignity and pride." The villagers murmured softly in agreement. Her words, though calm, carried a quiet power that reminded everyone of the importance of unity and courage. The men, still uncertain, began to retreat slightly. Their confidence had diminished as they faced both words and silent determination. One of them muttered something under his breath, while another glanced nervously at the growing crowd. They were realizing that intimidation alone could not maintain control when confronted by courage, unity, and reason. Elias remained vigilant, aware that their next move could determine whether the situation escalated or resolved peacefully. He positioned himself slightly in front of Layla, a protective stance without aggression, signaling that he was ready to defend her if necessary. Layla, now free, took a careful step forward. She refused to appear afraid or submissive. Her movements were deliberate, exuding confidence and dignity. The villagers noticed, their own resolve quietly strengthening. They had witnessed her ordeal, seen her chains fall, and now saw her reclaim her space with strength and courage. Layla understood that this moment was about more than her own freedom. It was a statement to the entire village that cruelty and humiliation would not be tolerated. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the field, the men finally began to retreat. They realized that continuing would only escalate the situation and bring further attention to their actions. Layla remained standing, her posture proud, as Elias stayed close by. Together, they symbolize the possibility of change, a reminder that courage and dignity could confront injustice without resorting to violence. The villagers, inspired by what they had witnessed, began to step forward cautiously. Some offered quiet words of encouragement to Layla, while others shared glances with Elias, acknowledging his bravery. There was a growing sense of community, a recognition that the strength of individuals combined could overcome fear and intimidation. Layla felt a deep sense of gratitude toward Elias, not just for freeing her physically, but for supporting her in a moment that required both courage and compassion. Layla and Elias began walking slowly toward the village center, the men having retreated completely. The villagers parted respectfully, allowing them to pass, while some silently expressed admiration. Layla could feel a sense of empowerment building within her, a recognition that her voice mattered and that standing up for oneself could inspire others to do the same. She realized that freedom was not just about being unchained. It was about reclaiming her dignity and refusing to allow fear to dictate her life. Along the way, Elias spoke quietly to her. "You were incredibly brave," he said, his tone sincere. "You didn't just rely on me. You stood tall, spoke your mind, and refused to be humiliated. That courage is what truly changes people." Layla nodded, absorbing the meaning of his words. She had felt fear, humiliation, and vulnerability, but she had also discovered a strength she hadn't fully recognized before. The experience, though painful and frightening, had shown her what she was capable of when courage met determination. The villagers, witnessing this moment, began to discuss what had happened quietly among themselves. They realized that fear had kept them silent for too long, but they also recognized that bravery, like Layla's and Elias, could inspire action. Some began planning ways to support one another more openly, ensuring that no one would face humiliation or injustice alone in the future. Layla understood that her ordeal had sparked a change, however small, in the way the village viewed courage, respect, and community. That evening, as the sun finally dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, Layla and Elias stood together, reflecting on the events of the day. The chains were gone, the men had retreated, and yet the sense of victory was quiet and profound. Layla felt a deep sense of pride, not just in her survival, but in her ability to stand firm, reclaim her dignity, and inspire hope in others. Elias, too, felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that courage and compassion had made a real difference. In that moment, Layla realized that courage is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, steadfast, and patient. It is the ability to remain calm under pressure, to speak truth in the face of intimidation, and to trust that others will support what is right. She had learned that help could come from unexpected places, and that even in moments of vulnerability, strength could emerge. Elias had shown her that standing for what is right was a choice, one that required both courage and patience. As the night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Layla felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had faced humiliation, fear, and danger, but she had emerged not only free but empowered. The events of the day would remain in her memory forever, a reminder of the power of courage, integrity, and human connection. She knew that her life had changed, and that the village had changed with her. Fear had been challenged, dignity reclaimed, and a quiet sense of hope had begun to grow. The men, meanwhile, returned to their homes, their minds racing with the realization that intimidation was not invincible. The sight of Layla standing strong, the presence of Elias defending what was right, and the silent support of the villagers had created a turning point. They knew that the balance of power in the village had shifted, and that actions like theirs would no longer go unchallenged. For Layla, the day had been a journey from fear to empowerment, from humiliation to strength. She had discovered that courage was not about being fearless. It was about facing fear with determination, dignity, and hope. The experience had taught her that help could come from others, but true courage often required standing up for oneself. She had reclaimed not just her freedom, but her sense of self-worth and her place in the community. By the time the village settled for the night, Layla's story had already begun to spread quietly from one neighbor to another. It was a story of bravery, compassion, and integrity, an example of how even in moments of fear and uncertainty, human courage could prevail. The seeds of change had been planted, and though the journey ahead would not always be easy, Layla knew that she and Elias had taken the first steps toward a stronger, kinder, and more courageous community. The next morning, the village awoke to a sense of calm, yet an undercurrent of tension remained. Word of what had happened to Layla the previous day had already begun to spread, and the villagers whispered among themselves, some expressing admiration, others cautious disbelief. Layla herself was awake before sunrise, her mind replaying the events of yesterday. She could still feel the cold bite of the chains against her wrists, the way fear had coursed through her veins, and the quiet strength that had risen in its place. Though she was free, she knew the ordeal had not ended, not until the village fully understood that cruelty and humiliation could not be tolerated. Elias arrived at her home early, as was his custom on busy mornings when work on the ranch required attention. But today, his visit was different. He came not for cattle or chores, but to check on Layla, to ensure that she was safe and that her spirit remained strong. She greeted him with a quiet smile, one that conveyed both gratitude and determination. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady, "not just for freeing me, but for showing me that courage is stronger than fear." Elias nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "The chains are gone," he replied, "but the challenge remains. Today we make sure that no one in this village fears humiliation again. The lesson must be clear. Respect comes from dignity, not cruelty." Layla nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. She realized that she had a choice, not only to heal from her own experience, but to help ensure that others would not endure the same pain. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, one that combined personal strength with community responsibility. Together, they walked toward the outskirts of the village, where the confrontation had taken place. The field, bathed in the soft light of morning, seemed almost peaceful, yet it held the echoes of the previous day's tension. Layla paused, looking at the post where she had been chained. The chains were gone, but the memory remained, a reminder of vulnerability, courage, and resilience. She touched the post lightly, drawing strength from her journey from fear to empowerment. "We cannot let this happen again," she said quietly, more to herself than to Elias. "Not to me, not to anyone." As they walked, villagers began to gather along the path, their curiosity outweighing their fear. They had seen Layla's courage, Elias' calm defiance, and the men's retreat, and now they wanted to witness the aftermath. Some villagers whispered words of encouragement to Layla, while others nodded quietly at Elias, acknowledging his role in standing up for justice. The atmosphere was shifting. The quiet strength displayed by both Layla and Elias was slowly inspiring the community to reconsider their own passivity. The men who had chained Layla were also awake, aware that their actions were being observed by the entire village. They gathered near the outskirts, speaking in hushed tones, their confidence shaken by the events of the previous day. For the first time, they faced the reality that intimidation alone could not control people who were courageous, united, and determined. Layla and Elias, walking steadily toward the village center, were a constant reminder of this new balance of power. Layla took a deep breath and addressed the villagers who had gathered to watch. "Yesterday I was chained and humiliated," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the field. "Today I am free, and I stand not just for myself but for all of you. We cannot allow cruelty to dictate our lives. We must support one another, speak for one another, and protect one another. Only then can we live with dignity." Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. The villagers listened intently, some nodding, some murmuring quiet agreement, and a few with tears in their eyes. Elia stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He spoke next, reinforcing her message. Courage is not just facing danger, it is standing for what is right, even when it is difficult. Layla has shown us that strength comes from dignity and resilience, not fear. Let this be a turning point for our village, a reminder that we all have a responsibility to protect one another. His voice, calm but firm, carried authority. The villagers felt the truth in his words, a sense of unity beginning to emerge. The men, realizing that they were being confronted not just by Layla and Elias, but by the eyes of the entire village, began to waver. One of them muttered, "We cannot continue this," while another tried to assert dominance with a harsh tone. But their words lacked conviction, their confidence shaken. Layla stepped forward slightly, her posture strong, her gaze unwavering. "Leave," she said firmly. "Do not let fear dictate your actions again. Today, you have a choice to act with respect or face the consequences of your actions in the eyes of the community." Her words, combined with Elia's steady presence, created a turning point. The villagers, previously silent out of fear, began to step forward slightly, forming a quiet barrier between Layla and the men. Their collective presence, though peaceful, amplified the authority of her words. For the first time, the men felt the weight of public scrutiny, the realization that their actions were no longer private, and that the village would no longer tolerate cruelty. Layla and Elias continued to advance slowly, maintaining a calm, deliberate pace. They were careful not to provoke further aggression, yet their steady movement demonstrated confidence and determination. The villagers, inspired by their courage, began to offer quiet support, soft words of encouragement, nods of approval, and subtle gestures that conveyed solidarity. The men looked around, realizing that intimidation alone could not withstand the combination of courage, dignity, and communal support. As they reached the center of the field, Layla turned to face the men fully. Her voice rang clear and unwavering. "This is the moment to choose respect over cruelty. We are not enemies. We are neighbors, members of the same village. But if you continue to harm others, you will find that the village stands united against injustice." Her words were calm, yet filled with authority, a reflection of the strength she had cultivated through her ordeal. Elias stood slightly behind her, his presence a reminder of support and protection. "We do not seek conflict," he added. "We seek fairness, dignity, and respect for everyone. Let this be a lesson not just for today, but for the future. Actions rooted in fear and cruelty will no longer prevail." His voice, steady and measured, carried across the field, reaching the ears of villagers who had gathered in quiet anticipation. The men finally began to retreat, slowly at first, and then with greater urgency. Their confidence had been broken, replaced by uncertainty and awareness of the consequences of their actions. Layla watched them go, her posture remaining strong, her gaze unwavering. Though she had faced humiliation and fear, she had reclaimed her dignity, and in doing so, inspired a sense of hope and courage throughout the village. The villagers, witnessing the men's retreat, began to murmur in quiet celebration. Some expressed relief, others admiration, and many reflected on the courage displayed by both Layla and Elias. A sense of unity began to emerge, as the community recognized that standing together and supporting one another could overcome fear and cruelty. Layla felt a profound sense of pride, knowing that her own bravery had contributed to this change. As the sun rose higher, bathing the field in warm light, Layla and Elias walked through the village, offering words of reassurance and encouragement to those they passed. Villagers greeted them with smiles, nods, and quiet gestures of gratitude. The atmosphere in the village had shifted. Where there had been fear and silence, there was now a growing sense of empowerment, dignity, and mutual respect. Layla reflected on the events of the past day and morning. She realized that courage was not about being fearless. It was about facing fear with dignity, integrity, and hope. She had learned that even in moments of vulnerability, strength could emerge, and that help could come from others who were willing to act with compassion and bravery. Elias had shown her that standing up for what is right often required patience, calmness, and determination. By midday, the village had begun to return to its normal rhythm, but the impact of the events lingered. Conversations among villagers carried themes of courage, respect, and community support. People spoke quietly about how fear had long influenced their actions, and how they could now act with integrity and confidence. Layla's ordeal had sparked not only her personal growth, but also a quiet revolution within the community, encouraging unity, courage, and moral responsibility. As the day drew to a close, Layla found a quiet moment to reflect. She stood near the post where she had been chained, now surrounded by villagers who had come to witness her courage and resilience. She realized that freedom was not merely the absence of chains, but the presence of dignity, courage, and community support. The experience had changed her, but it had also changed the village. Fear had been confronted, courage had been demonstrated, and the potential for lasting respect and justice had been planted. Elias joined her, standing quietly by her side. "You did more than survive," he said softly. "You inspired courage, not just in yourself, but in everyone who witnessed this. Your strength will carry forward in ways you may not even realize yet." Layla smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced humiliation and fear, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more empowered. The village had witnessed not just a rescue, but a transformation, and the seeds of lasting change had been planted. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Layla knew that the ordeal was over, but the journey of empowerment and community resilience was only beginning. The chains that had once bound her had fallen away, replaced by freedom, dignity, and hope. And in that quiet moment, she understood that courage, integrity, and unity could overcome even the darkest moments, leaving a legacy of strength and respect that would endure long after the sun had set. The following morning, the village was quiet, but there was a different feeling in the air. Where there had once been tension and fear, there was now a sense of calm confidence. Villagers went about their daily routines with a quiet pride, their heads held a little higher, their movements a little freer. They had witnessed courage in action, and that courage had changed not just one person but an entire community. Layla walked through the village with Elias at her side, her steps steady, her posture strong, and her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. The events of the past 2 days were still fresh in her mind. She recalled the weight of the chains, the humiliation of being displayed before everyone, and the fear that had pressed against her chest like a heavy stone. But those memories were now balanced with something far stronger, memories of courage, of support, of dignity reclaimed. The chains were gone, but more importantly, the feeling of helplessness had been replaced with empowerment. She knew that what had happened to her could have happened to anyone in the village, and that realization made her even more determined to ensure that no one else would ever be subjected to the same fear. Elias walked beside her, observing the villagers as they went about their tasks. He could see the subtle changes, the way people greeted each other with warmth rather than suspicion, the small acts of kindness that seemed more frequent, the way children played freely without the shadow of fear that had lingered before. He glanced at Layla and said softly, "This is the start of something important. Today, you've inspired more than just yourself. You've inspired the entire village." Layla nodded, feeling a sense of pride that was both quiet and profound. She paused at the edge of the field where the chains had once held her. The post, now bare, stood as a silent witness to the events that had transpired. Layla touched it lightly, feeling the rough wood under her fingers. "This place will always remind me," she said softly, "not of fear but of courage, not of humiliation but of strength." Elias placed a hand gently on her shoulder, offering reassurance. "And not just your strength," he said. "The village will remember this too." Courage spreads and people begin to stand for one another. Word of the events had already reached every corner of the village. People came forward quietly, offering gestures of support, gratitude, and encouragement. Some thanked Layla personally, others thanked Elias, but all were touched by the courage displayed. There was a quiet understanding among them that the village had changed. Fear would no longer rule their actions, and intimidation would no longer go unchallenged. Layla felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing that her ordeal had sparked such a transformation. Throughout the day, Layla spoke with various villagers, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to stand together against injustice. She emphasized the importance of supporting one another, of acting with courage and integrity, and of refusing to allow fear to control their lives. The villagers listened intently, inspired by her words. Many admitted that they had often remained silent in the face of wrongdoing, but seeing Layla's strength and Elia's support had shown them a better way. Slowly, a quiet but powerful shift was taking place, a shift from fear to empowerment, from passivity to action. As the afternoon sun bathed the village in a warm glow, Layla and Elias visited the homes of those who had quietly witnessed the previous day's events. They offered words of encouragement, reassured the villagers that courage was not just for a few, but for everyone, and reminded them that they had the power to create change. Layla realized that her role was not simply to recover from what had happened, but to help others find their own voices and their own courage. Every conversation, every encouraging word, reinforced the sense that the village was healing and growing stronger together. In the midst of these interactions, Layla noticed the young children playing near the field. They laughed freely, chasing one another without a hint of fear. She felt a warm sense of hope, realizing that the events of the past days had created a safer, more supportive environment for the next generation. These children would grow up witnessing courage, dignity, and integrity, rather than intimidation and fear. Layla smiled, knowing that her experience had not only changed her life, but would leave a lasting impact on the village for years to come. Elias and Layla paused for a moment near the edge of the village, watching the sun begin its descent. The light painted the fields and rooftops in golden hues, reflecting the warmth and hope that had begun to take root in the community. "You've done something remarkable," Elias said quietly. "You've faced fear, stood for what is right, and inspired everyone around you." That is not something many people can do. Layla felt a deep sense of humility and pride. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "You stood by me. The villagers even quietly supported me. Courage grows when it is shared." The day drew to a close, and the village began to settle for the night. Layla returned to her home, feeling a sense of peace she had never experienced before. She reflected on the journey she had taken, from fear and humiliation to freedom, dignity, and empowerment. Every moment, every choice she had made had led her to this point. She realized that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steadfast, and patient. Sometimes it was simply refusing to be broken, even in the most difficult moments. That night, as stars appeared in the sky and the village lay in calm silence, Layla thought about the future. She knew that challenges would come, that fear and cruelty could appear in different forms, but she also knew that she had learned a vital lesson. Courage, dignity, and unity could overcome even the darkest moments. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just to protect herself, but to support others, to ensure that the village remained a place where everyone could live without fear. The following days and weeks were filled with small but meaningful changes. Villagers began helping one another more openly, offering support in times of need, and speaking out against injustice when they encountered it. Layla and Elias worked together to encourage unity, ensuring that the community remained strong and vigilant. The memory of the chains that had once bound Layla became a symbol, not of fear, but of resilience, courage, and the importance of standing together. Over time, Layla's story became more than just a personal experience. It became a lesson for the entire village. Children grew up hearing about her courage. Villagers discussed her bravery and Elia's support, and newcomers learned about the strength and integrity that defined the community. Layla realized that her ordeal, painful as it had been, had created a ripple effect that would influence the lives of many for years to come. One evening, as Layla walked through the village with Elias, she paused near the field where she had been chained. The post remained, now weathered but standing tall, a silent witness to the courage that had been displayed there. Layla touched it lightly, feeling a mixture of gratitude and reflection. "This will always remind me," she said softly, "that fear can be faced, that dignity can be reclaimed, and that courage grows when we support one another." Elias smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And it will remind everyone in this village," he said. "Your courage has created a legacy that will endure." As the stars twinkled above, Layla felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced humiliation, fear, and uncertainty, but she had emerged not only free but empowered. She had discovered that true courage is a combination of standing up for oneself, seeking help when needed, and inspiring others to do the same. Her experience had transformed her, Elias, and the entire village, leaving a legacy of hope, dignity, and resilience. In the years that followed, Layla became a symbol of strength and courage in her village. She continued to speak out against injustice, support her neighbors, and encourage the younger generation to face challenges with dignity. Elias remained a steadfast friend and ally, guiding and supporting the community alongside her. Together, they ensured that the village remained a place where fear could no longer dictate actions, and where courage, integrity, and unity would always prevail. And though the chains that had once bound her were long gone, the lessons they had taught her remained forever. Layla knew that life would present challenges, but she had learned that no obstacle, no humiliation, and no act of cruelty could diminish the strength of a determined and courageous heart. She had faced fear, reclaimed her dignity, and inspired an entire village, proving that courage, compassion, and unity could truly transform lives.